whatever, but people had only seen the headline. So I think and with these people living in the communities and stuff, what I would hope is that the players obviously know they've tested positive, and they're speaking to anyone they're in contact with, and the tracing program that the RFL and the clubs have in place is being robustly dealt with, so that the wider public don't necessarily need to know who's tested positive in terms of that testing side of things, just to kind of protect from any negative backlash unnecessarily. Whereas this breaching the protocols is slightly different because they're talking about handing out suspensions.
Yeah.
So sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, you go on and say who, and then we'll ask the next question.
Yeah, Wigan's Jackson Hastings, Huddersfield's James Gavey, and Warrington's Riley Dean have all been sanctioned for breaching the protocols. The trio have been fined and received 14-day bans, although Hastings' suspension has already elapsed. Gavey's ban runs only till the 27th of August, so that's this Thursday. Whereas Dean is suspended until the 30th of August. The bans which are in line with, well, he wouldn't have been playing, let's assume anyway. The bans which are in line with the recommendations of self-isolation period run from the date of the transgression. And the bans, as we said, span all rugby league activities, so it includes matches and training. The RFL, which did not specify the nature of the offences, added that it will be providing a weekly update on any further breaches of its coronavirus protocols. And with that news story, Karen Morehouse, who's the chief regulatory officer of the RFL and becoming far more visible during this COVID times, said COVID protocols were established in the weeks leading up to the resumption of Super League season earlier this month, with an emphasis on player education and collective buy-in, and with clubs encouraged to agree and enforce their own codes of conduct. In the main, the protocols have been observed, and we are grateful for the majority of clubs and players and other individuals involved for their responsible and disciplined approach. However, we are in a situation where breaches of the protocols by any individuals connected with the game could have serious repercussions for all, either an impact on the individual and public health, or in terms of disruption to the rescheduled fixtures. Joshua's granddad got in touch on this. John said, once more the RFL has shown their greatness at being totally inept. Players banned from games they have already actually played in. You couldn't make it up.
Yeah, I think, and it sort of brings it on to my question, so thanks Papa John for that, does this make it a bit of a nonsense that they can play in the game but then be banned retrospectively, or should they just then be made to serve a subsequent ban afterwards, or how? It just doesn't feel quite right in the way it's been done here.
No, it doesn't, does it? It does feel strange that, in particular Hastings and Gavey, I mean Riley Dean, with due respect to the young talented player, wouldn't have been getting ahead of the people in front of him at Warrington for next weekend's game. You wouldn't suspect there would probably have to be 3 or 4 injuries to see him play. But certainly Hastings and Gavey, and Hastings obviously has played in games in his period of his suspension, which does sound ludicrous. My personal take on it is I'd kind of like Wigan and Huddersfield to both sort of sit down Hastings and Gavey for this week's game, so that some sort of sense of justice is felt out there by the rabid social media crowd that will be calling for, further justice than this, and certainly claiming that there's some inherent bias here in these decisions, and they're going to forget that James Gavey's on this list and only talk about Jackson Hastings when they do so. But I think that both the clubs involved probably, possibly, arguably haven't done enough enforcement of their own codes of conduct, maybe with these two players in particular, whether they were aware of the issues or not. So I'd be saying they need to be visible, doing something here, and standing down both players for this weekend's games, I think would be appropriate.
I think it would send a strong message to other players that this isn't acceptable, and I think we don't want it to look like rugby league players are flouting the rules, and we don't want it to look like rugby league players are the stupid ones, and that'll affect public perception and particularly government perception, and that is the sort of thing that will potentially affect the perception of getting fans back in stadiums quicker. So anything we can do to get those fans back in and get those income streams back up again for clubs, yeah. I think we need to be dealing with it harshly and really being on it, to be honest.
Now, there's a question here over sort of the time that's elapsed and stuff, because My understanding is that some of these, and you see from players making certain social media platforms private now, that some of these things came from observing what players have put on social media.
Well, as we might have said a few times in this podcast, if you're going to be stupid, don't do it on social media.
But what I'm wondering is whether these players knew that what they were doing, how aware were they? How much had they educated themselves? That sort of stuff. So kind of, and I also would say I'd not heard anything of this 2-week ban or anything until today, until last night. So, and had anyone else been talking about it? So has it only been brought in as a kind of a reaction to the fact that we've realised that...
Well, I did see one thing that said it had only been agreed that was going to happen last week, so I don't know if it is this happened and then they've agreed it after the event.
Yeah, so I think that's possibly it, in which case I do think it would be unfair to to future punish people for things that they didn't necessarily realise was a punishable offence, if you know what I mean. If the guidelines and protocols weren't essentially so clear, and certainly if the consequences of those things weren't necessarily clear, and I push responsibility a bit more back onto the clubs there than the players about making those things clear, then is it fair, I suppose, which is why I think the clubs should take a stance now with the players.
So could it be that the club should be fined as well? There should be player action, and should there be a club fine? Is it almost like a failing to control your players situation? You haven't controlled them.
Yeah. Well, certainly.
Is there a club responsibility?
If clubs were expecting to agree and enforce sort of their own code of conduct. I think this is a reaction to what happened with the outbreak at Hull FC, and I think it's a further step in the kind of right direction to pushing against any sort of complacency. So hopefully more players will take heed of what's being sorted out here with this, and it won't happen continuously. That's what I hope, and then this is more a warning and a kind of it's described as a warning, but I think that I would certainly like some sort of acknowledgement that from the players that even if they didn't realise what they were doing would have these consequences, they appreciate that they probably haven't been as sensible as they should have been with the way they've conducted themselves, and and that sort of stuff. And like I said, I think Wigan and Huddersfield should probably stand these players down for the next weekend's game to kind of see that justice appears to be done. But I don't think that there's any grand fucking scheme of like corruption here behind this. I think the RFL has stepped up their
in a shock rugby league move. It was cock up rather than conspiracy.
Yeah, and also I think it was more reaction to something that they maybe they hadn't foreseen. They hadn't realised that these players are beyond. They are human. They are, and also not always capable of understanding instructions. Which is great when they go out on the field and do something you don't expect from them, but when they do something that puts the sport at risk, I think it needs to be taken more seriously. And the RFL, by bringing this in, are taking stuff more seriously that I don't think they were taking seriously enough until we saw what happened with how quickly it can disrupt the fixture list, how decimate a whole a squad, that sort of stuff. And that's why I think we should be, yes, critical that something more robust wasn't put in place already, but congratulate them on reacting to what they're seeing and now putting something in, rather than focusing on the fact that people's bans are retrospective or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Yeah, fair play, they have actually done something once, which isn't something we've always been able to say in the past.
No. But I don't expect any players to be stood down by their clubs
No.
season where there's only a top four. That's not going to happen, unfortunately. Players have been fined, so even if they've not missed any games, they've been fined and they've tested negative for COVID. Let's put those two things out there, I suppose, as kind of counterance to anything otherwise. So they have been punished in some way, even if you don't feel like it's quite as much as you would want. And if it gets applied consistently, people can't argue, can they?
No. Right, on to signings palooza.
Yes, let's whip through a load. Do you want to start?
Yeah, Whitehaven have announced the signing of 23-year-old Australian prop Ryan King ahead of the 2021 season. The former South Sydney and Cronulla junior will link up with Gary Charlton's squad at the end of the year.
Widnes Vikings have announced that McGrath Luluai, Jack Johnson and Liam Cooper will all depart the club at the end of 2020. Luluai has been with the Vikings for 10 seasons, having made the move to Widnes in 2011, is returning home for family reasons, whilst Johnson and Cooper will both leave, having only joined the club ahead of this year's campaign, with Cooper having not made a competitive appearance in the Black and Whites due to injury.
More Widnes news, and Widnes have confirmed that one-year deals for hometown duo Joe Edge and Joe Lyons ahead of next year's championship campaign. 20-year-old Edge has already represented England twice at under-16 level and returned to Widnes last year. 22-year-old Lyons made his debut in Widnes' Super 8 fixture against the Leeds Rhinos in 2018 and has made 25 appearances in 2019, crossing for 7 tries.
Yeah, he looks a talent, doesn't he, Joe Lyons?
Yeah.
Halifax have confirmed the retention of prop Elliot Morris. The 24-year-old has made 83 appearances for the club so far, scoring 8 tries. Not a bad strike rate, that, for a prop, is it? 1 in 10?
That's pretty good, yeah. It's pretty good. Levi Nzungu has signed a 1-year extension at the Bradford Bulls, and Nzungu joined from semi-professional French side Albi Tigers in December 2019 on a 1-year deal. The 22-year-old has experience with Super League-sized Salford Red Devils and Hull FC and had a brief spell with Toulouse Olympique.
That's not something you hear very often in the back streets of Sydney, is it? Albi Tigers.
No.
No, I won't. Young hooker Thomas Doyle will remain at Bradford for the 2021 season after signing a new deal. Doyle made his debut for the Bulls in 2019 and scored 2 tries in 4 games in 2020.
Lee have announced the re-signing of everyone's favourite wife, Alex Gerrard, until the end of the 2021 season. The forward made more than 110 appearances for Widnes before leaving for Australia in 2018. He joined Lee in January after a brief spell with the Mackay Cutters and made his debut against Dewsbury in the first game of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping she could get a deal up in Scotland, but I think this is the best for all parties, isn't it?
She doesn't fancy playing in the Euro 13 for Edinburgh Eagles, then?
No.
If the Euro 13 actually ever happens.
Ex-Wigan Academy League champion Sam Grant has signed a new 1-year deal with Swinton. Grant, who's 21, joined the Lions ahead of the 2020 campaign and made a try-scoring debut in the Challenge Cup against Lee Miners Rangers.
Swinton have announced the re-signing of Dean Meadows. Dean
with an E on the end.
Dean with an E. Meadows for the 2021 championship season. Meadows is 26, joined the club last August, having previously appeared for Shevington Sharks.
Yeah, the only Dean I've ever seen spelled like that is Brian Dean.
Yeah.
So it's surname Dean Meadows. Oldham have announced the re-signing of scrum half Dave Hewitt on a 1-year deal. Hewitt, 24, made his debut for the Ruffians when he was 19 and has gone on to score more than 300 points for the club in 101 appearances.
Oldham have also announced the signing of dummy half Matty Wilkinson on a 1-year deal. Wilkinson, who's 24, has now signed his 5th contract with the club, extending his stay until November 2021.
Batley Bulldogs have confirmed the signing of experienced winger Jody Broughton, the fastest quantity surveyor in the world, from Halifax ahead of the 2021 season. The 32-year-old will link up with Craig Lingard's side after just 1 season with Fax, having previously played almost 200 Super League games during spells with Leeds, Hull FC, Salford, Huddersfield and Catalans. I mean, that's a high calibre signing for Batley.
Yeah, that's a statement of intent for them. Someone that they've done well to pick up.
Yeah,
and
got
Batley
left, I think.
Yeah. Batley have announced the signing of former Super League forward Keegan Hurst for the 2021 championship campaign. Hurst, who's 32, returns for his 3rd stint with the club.
Lee have announced the re-signing of forward Tom Spencer on a 1-year deal. Spencer's 29, has played more than 100 games for Lee and is currently in his 2nd permanent spell with the club, having rejoined them from the London Broncos in 2019.
Yet more Widnes news, and the club have announced that Callum O'Neill has signed a one-year deal